Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're so excited to have you here this afternoon for creating a holistic first year experience, responding to the present and revisioning the future. I'm Sarah Govea, Vice President of Youth Thrive Educational Services. And for those who haven't had the opportunity of working with just yet, Youth Thrive Educational Services offers mental and emotional wellness programs for college students to help college students reduce stress, become more resilient, and thrive throughout their undergraduate careers and beyond. We are so excited to be here with all of you this afternoon, and we're extremely excited to be here with Dr. Joe Cuseo, our colleague and our friend. A little bit about Joe. I'd like to highlight the few of the very many accomplishments of Joe. Joe is a professor emeritus of psychology from Marymount, California University. He is a 14-time recipient of the Faculty Member of the Year Award. He is also a recipient of the Diamond Honoree Award from the ACPA. In addition to this, Joe has delivered hundreds of campus workshops, conference presentations, and keynote addresses all across this country, as well as Europe, Asia, Australia, and the Middle East. So truly all over the world. He's also authored numerous articles and books on student learning, student retention, and faculty development. And before I hand it over to Joe, I just would like to touch on a few quick housekeeping items for today. So please just take a moment and locate your Q&A feature on the Zoom toolbar, and we'll be utilizing that today. We're really hoping for today to be a conversation, to be a discussion. So please, as you have questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A, and we'll be sure to get to them. We've left ample time for this and would love to have this be more of a conversation and a dialogue amongst us all. Lastly, we will be participating in an exercise a little later on. This is something we hope you will take back and use with your students. So you can use it whether you're teaching online or in the classroom. And Joe will move into this and talk about this in greater detail. And I think that's it on my end. Joe, I would love to turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Sarah, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. I think I need to explain how I am connected with Sarah in this program. It originated in Las Vegas at a conference, and I was doing a presentation on the importance of a holistic approach to the first year experience, something I've been preaching now for 3 decades, and including attention to students' social and emotional needs. During the presentation, I pointed out that the origins of the whole first year experience movement in South Carolina were heavily influenced by the work actually of a counseling psychologist from Stanford by the name of Nevitt Sanford. You FYE folks probably familiar with the idea of challenge, support, striking that balance for optimal performance. That was the man associated with that. But he also wrote a book entitled Where Colleges Fail, which I think is my bookshelf back there somewhere. And his thesis was that colleges fail when they fail to treat the student as a whole person. That book was read by the president of the University of South Carolina and a number of individuals. This is the late 60s when there were riots and there were concerns about being treated as a number, a student number rather than a person. And that was the origin of the whole first year experience movement. One person in the audience was a co-founder of Youth Thrive and approached me afterward and said, your message really aligns with our program, which is a focus on students' social and emotional development. There's congruence here. Can you help us advance your program and your efforts, particularly with respect to the first year? And I didn't say no. I guess I agreed. And the result is we've had kind of a partnership since then.
Great. Thank you, Joe. So I have a question for you.
Okay.
I'm wondering, what trends did you see developing in the content of first year experience programming prior to COVID-19?
Okay. Before COVID-19,
Before COVID.
judging from I like to go where the practitioners are. They're in the trenches. Judging from reading every email that's posted on the first year experience listserv, which is comprised of over 3,500 people, from the conferences that I've gone to for the last 20 years or so in a row, And the publications that come out of the National Research Center, the First Year Experience Journal and newsletter, I'd say an increased, before COVID, increased emphasis on non-cognitive factors that influence student success, particularly grit, growth mindset, resilience, those sorts of things were growing exponentially prior to COVID. I also saw within the 5 to 7 years prior to COVID a real exponential increase in attention to the concept of mindfulness, not only in the FYE, but nationally. In some of the research that you're going to provide the participants access to, you'll see an article I found in there that between 2005 and 2015, the number of published articles on mindfulness increased from 500 to over 15,000, a real sharp increase in attention to that concept, perhaps because of social technology and the idea of being plugged in, people multitasking. We've got to call time out, slow things down, be fully present. I saw that happening prior to COVID. And the other thing I started to see, I think it was in the mid-90s, there was a book by a counselor called College of the Overwhelmed, saying that so many students were coming to college with mental health issues or experiencing them during college. And that seemed to pick up really heavily post 21st century, culminating in a report just in this past December around Christmas by the American Council of Education, where 70% of college and university presidents report that students' mental health is now among their top concerns. So I'd say those would be the big three: non-cognitive factors, increased mindfulness, increased attention to students' mental health.
Thank you, Joe. It's interesting. You talk about mindfulness, and when I was teaching as an adjunct professor of psychology, many of my students were saying how stressed they were. They were telling me, I'm overwhelmed. I have work after class. One of my students was taking care of a sibling and had that additional responsibility. And so I decided to offer mindfulness meditations after class. I'm going to share the story. I know it's one that I've told you before and that you love, Joe. And I had 28 students in my class. I made this purely optional. I said mindfulness can help to reduce stress. And if you'd like to come stay after class, you're more than welcome. It won't count for extra credit. It's, just purely optional to do. And of my 28 students, 17 of them decided to stay.
It's telling. Yeah.
And I felt it was very telling. And their comments, their feedback was so telling. They said, thank you. That was just what I needed, or I do feel more calm. And so I decided to continue to offer mindfulness meditations after class. And I had one student in particular who loved them and asked if he could bring his girlfriend. And so she would come and meet us after class and join all of the students as well. And I found it to be so beneficial for my students. I could just see the difference that it made in their lives. And it was a simple tool to integrate into the
that they were intrinsically motivated to seek out, which is really exciting.
Really
there was no incentive other than the experience. Yeah, thanks.
And it kept them coming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they found it beneficial. So just wanted to share that.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just wondering, is there any particular content that you feel should be more intentionally included or added into the first year experiencing programming as a result of COVID-19?
Well, I'd love to see the non-cognitive stuff continue. I think that was great. Non-cognitive, it's kind of a misnomer because growth mindset, self-efficacy, those are beliefs. So in some ways, it is cognitive. That affect academic performance. They're not just study skills or study strategies or academic ability. It's the beliefs and attitudes. I like that. I'd like to build on that. Not only do attitudes and thoughts affect academic performance, but so does emotions affect academics. So I'd like to pick up the affective part a little bit more directly. The brain doesn't compartmentalize the cognitive and affective. I mean, we do it professionally. We have the academic support specialists and we have the counselors, but that's not how the brain works. We know that there's an intersection of those aspects of the self. So I'd love to see more attention to the affective part. For those who need to persuade administrators, recent research from the Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, this was a 2017 study in the packet that you'll send the participants. Um, Students who reported mental health challenges in college or on campus were twice at risk for attrition. So there's a connection between mental health and persistence. And that's now aggravated. That was 2017. Of course, COVID with social isolation, the loss of friendships and the opportunities are aggravating that. The research that I'm seeing is that the 18 to 24-year-olds are the most vulnerable during COVID, reporting more poor mental health than any other age group. For almost 50%, I think it was 46%. The stats are in the article. So if I make a mistake, reported experiencing an emotional disorder as a result from COVID. PBS has had a whole series of online podcasts on rethinking college, one of which was devoted entirely to the students' mental health crisis that's been peaking during COVID. So I'd love to see more attention to the emotional wellness. I would argue we need a paradigm shift or a paradigm augmentation where we look at college preparedness as not just academic preparedness, but I think we now have to call it emotional preparedness for college, just as we have used the term academic. And can we have a curriculum that not only promotes cognitive development, but promotes emotional development? We use the term emotional intelligence already. We use terms like self-regulation, which involve more than just cognitive. Metacognition, thinking about how we're thinking. Well, we could apply that to thinking about our feelings and our emotions, positive and negative. And we can think critically about our emotional experience, just as we can about a piece of research or a piece of literature. I love to see a bit of that paradigm shift. Now, if I can plug your program, frankly, mindfulness was something that I got introduced to from my son, who was, he went through a lot, a cancer recovery victim, and he used that to deal with the stress and some depression he had from that. And I started to read the literature about that, and the research is really powerful. If you're interested in the research, it's going to be in that document that you'll share. I was impressed by the volume and the rigor of the research on mindfulness, particularly about its impact not only in improving students' attention and focus, but preventing mind wandering and ruminating, which my son was doing that was actually aggravating his condition. So it's a classic example, I think, mindfulness of not only of helping a person with attention and cognitive, but also preventing that ruminating that can enhance stress and depression. The other thing I liked about mindfulness is that it's a trainable, transferable skill. It's portable. It could be done anywhere, anytime, across the curriculum, freshman through senior year, and throughout life. It could be considered one of those lifelong learning skills. So I'm a big fan of the mindfulness, which is in your program. When I started reading about mindfulness, I again stumbled across some stuff, again, through my son originally. I was a psych major and psych cognitive guy in graduate school, but positive psychology, I'm too old for that. Tony got it when he was in college. And I came across the positive psychology movement. I immediately recognized strengths, which has always been an FYE thing. How can we, talents and strength quests, FYE folks are very aware of that. But I became aware that strengths were just one sliver of a larger pie. Positive psychology, that was one piece of it, that it was a whole asset-based, not deficit-based approach to emotional wellness, which I thought was really cool. It was like it was non-stigmatized, non-remedial. Let's focus on some of the positive aspects of emotional development, including happiness, which was my son's passion. And I came across a humorist quote not too long ago. I was reading another book, and he said, "I don't know how to be happy. They didn't teach me that at school." In school, and I was just thinking, well, why not? Why can't we be more intentional? And that's what positive psychology is about. Let's study people who have reported happiness. What are the factors that contributed to that? Can they be learned? And in addition to other positive emotions like optimism, joy, contentment, gratitude. So I'm excited about the possibility of positive psychology being added to this COVID strategy. as a buffer to negative emotions, and to maybe reach those murky in the middle that may not be suffering from mental illness, but they're not exactly thriving in college. They're coping, but they're kind of languishing and not flourishing. I think positive psychology can slide the curve, take those in the middle, move them a little bit more toward academic excellence. And I always like the idea of strengths. Let's accentuate our talents and build on that. And also to reach your true potential. And the other thing about positive, it's the idea of values, awareness of your values and what's important to you, so that not only you reach your true potential, but you're true to yourself. And so I'm excited about that. Self-compassion, frankly, was something I wasn't aware of until I started hanging out with you guys. And it's, in a sense, basically being mindful of your struggles, your self-doubts, and treating them. You can explain this better than me, so I'm stealing your act. Stealing them, dealing with them compassionately. No shame, no blame. You meet them, you don't get defensive or dismissive about it. In fact, could we use those struggles as a source of resilience or growth? And I think that's very powerful for all students, particularly for the growing number of first-generation students and students of color who may have self-doubts, the imposter syndrome. I see self-compassion really perhaps playing a powerful role as a tool in helping them in that respect. I'm over answering this question. Just to summarize it at the end, I see all three of these: mindfulness, positive psychology, self-compassion. From an assessment standpoint, they're all measurable. We have scales, so we can document student growth with this. And most importantly, as I mentioned before, there's transferable skills that are actionable. They can be practiced to get better. And from the research that I've reviewed, even short, I mean, ideally, the more practice, the better, but even short interventions with these three can increase effectiveness in positive student outcomes. And I like the fact that in your program, you've kind of merged them. I was reading them on parallel tracks. I see these as complementary skills. And maybe I can't articulate this as well as it's better in the reading, but I see mindfulness as being an awareness, and awareness then of all emotions, certainly positive emotions that you can use to advance yourself, and also awareness of negative emotions that you should then be compassionate about. So it's the, I don't know what to say, the dispassionate objectivity of mindfulness combined with the compassionate acceptance of self-compassion and the acceptance and awareness of a positive emotion. I see a synergy there that we haven't capitalized on yet. And I explain that better in the article if I blew it there. But
That's wonderful. Thank you, Joe. And I think you highlighted something so nice, that these tools are easy to implement, that you can use them anytime and anywhere, and there's such a variety in each of these fields, which I think is something so beautiful about them.
And I'd like to reinforce, Sarah, again, your comment. The research base for positive psychology is strong, and self-compassion is growing even stronger, not only in general, but with college students in particular, which excites me. And I know in the FYE, we always have to sell, prove it. We never did, no one ever asked to prove my general psychology class, whether that was worth taking, or my psychobiology class. We always have to prove it. So I think the article, for those of us who are always looking for fodder for the canon to justify our programs, I'm really excited about the existing and continuing growing body of research to support those three pillars there, the positive psychology, mindfulness, and self-compassion. I'm sorry, Sarah.
Thank you, Joe. No, not at all. And I'd like to add one more thing about self-compassion. I think it's so beneficial in helping us to bounce back from failure as well. College is a hard time. We're learning, we're growing, we're doing so many things, and we're bound to have experiences that are challenging or difficult to us, whether it's getting an exam back and not being so happy with it, or maybe you get turned down asking somebody out on a date, right? These types of things happen, and offering ourselves self-compassion can be so powerful in helping us become more resilient and bounce back from these failures.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, and the FYE has always been concerned with students who start slowly or on probation, offering special courses to try to enable them to convert that setback into a comeback and the bounce back. And I wonder if some of this material could be very legitimate additions to the curriculum for students who are in trying to bounce back from an early setback, in addition to the academic success strategies that we've infused into those probationary courses.
Absolutely, because I think they're so powerful in helping to cultivate resilience. Mindfulness, recognizing our emotions and everything that's going on with a greater sense of clarity, and then knowing that we have the kindness and compassion within ourselves to offer ourselves this kindness when we need it most.
Well
Absolutely,
put.
Joe. Yeah, thank you. So, like to keep moving on, so we have some time for questions. How do you think this content should be delivered to maximize its positive impact on student success?
Well, it's a good question. It's what content delivered is important, but how and when it's delivered is equally important. Now, I'll do the when first. I know I'm twisting the question a little. The term proactive has always been on the lips of people in first year experience. That's what we're all about. Deliver early, front loading, as we used to call it. That it's better to be preventative and short circuit problems rather than trying to react to them after the fact and fix them. Because those of us who work with first year students, it can be too little too late. I mean, we may lose them, but then we lose so many between the first and the second year. So this content, I'd love to see it front loaded, so we can short circuit mental health challenges before they eventuate in a attrition case. The other thing I like about front loading, I think this gets less attention by being proactive. Those in the murky middle, get them early and then have the opportunity for 4 years to continue to use them. So that can be of a cumulative impact if we equip students with skills early, that they can continue to use throughout their 4-year college experience. So I see it benefiting, intercepting the attritters, if I can butcher the language, and empowering those in the middle with skills that they can use cumulatively throughout their college experience. Folks out there who are in the retention field, you know, proactive, the other delivery strategy, now this is more of the how, is intrusive. It's the term that used to be used. It's, in other words, aggressive outreach on our part as institutions. We initiate, bring what we think we know students need to them, rather than waiting and hoping and salivating that they'll come and take advantage of it, which I think has been referred to as passive programming. It's like Field of Dreams, you know, build it and they will come. Well, not necessarily. What we know about students' utilization of support services is that they're woefully underutilized, particularly by those students who need them the most. So I would say that to the extent that we can make the delivery of these services intrusive, to increase their utilization, and that has particular implications for underrepresented students in this issue of emotional wellness. The research is pretty consistent that students from underrepresented cultures are less likely to seek mental health support than those from overrepresented cultures. So intrusiveness, I think, really has an equity value as well for mental health. Now, how do you make it intrusive? Now, I know that this is the challenge. It's easy for me to say. How do we make the peripheral and the optional essential and required? I guess that's the word. We need to make it inescapable. I hate to use the word mandatory because it sounds so compulsory, but we've done it before. Can we integrate it into our required coursework? We've done this with academic support. Rather than waiting and hoping that students go to the academic support center, we have supplemental instruction, which is built into the course, peer mediated. And we've done that with library instruction, information literacy. Rather than hoping they go to a library, integrated into our existing courses. I think we could do the same thing with emotional support, course integrated emotional support, just like we've talked about course integrated academic support. And the beauty of that, when you build it into the normal curriculum, then doesn't seem abnormal or remedial if you go get it, or in the case of mental health services, it destigmatizes it. It's just part of the curriculum. You don't go there if you're lame, or if it's just part of what you learn as you would learn anything cognitive. So that takes the stigma off, which I think is huge. And of course, scalability is a big term now. Once you can build it in the curriculum, now you're starting to have a scalable systemic effect. You're not just reaching a portion of the student population. You're really producing a more pervasive effect. Now, how could this be done? I want to pause a little bit because I know there are practical challenges that we all face in the first year experience. We have courses like first year seminars, first year experience courses. I know we're limited time, many of them are 1 or 2 units, but I would encourage our team to utilize that 2-to-1 rule. If students are to expend 2, some say 3 hours out of class for every hour in class, I think we can be more intentional about stretching our time and impact on students by not always having to cover it in class. Maybe we can deliver some of this emotional wellness material outside of class through assignments, just like doing term papers or reading. They could do viewing, they can do other sorts of reading that relates to emotional wellness or practice to that. And this is not a zero-sum game. I know the first year, well, we don't have enough time. We've got to cover all this academic content and this stuff for advising. But I don't see this as a rob from Peter, give to Paul zero-sum game. Much of the research on emotional wellness indicates that it enhances academic performance, that it increases critical and creative thinking and deep learning strategies. So it's not like you're taking it away from the cognitive to address the emotional. You're really working hand in glove to encounter both fronts. If you can't get it in the first year seminar course, some colleges have what they call an FYE embedded general education courses. So you take an English course or a speech class. One school uses a geography class that are general education courses, and the instructor is willing to incorporate some FYE material. In this case, it could be in the emotional wellness realm, particularly courses that I don't want to say are content free, but are content fluid, like writing and speaking, where they can write or speak about anything they want. Why not allow emotional wellness content to be tacked onto that? Some colleges actually, for general education courses, like a writing course that's willing to add FYE content, award the course even an extra unit, make it a 4-unit course in addition to 3-unit course, so the instructor doesn't feel that they're losing instructional time to pick up the FYE material. Now, failing that, the other alternatives are going through the co-curriculum. Orientation program is required in many places already. It's a prerequisite for the students to advise their first term. I see that as a target area for some of this, particularly if we're putting a lot of orientation material online that might open up more time for emotional content to be covered. I see the possibility of some of the content being facilitated by trained peer mentors. With all those colleges who have peer mentoring program, can we add emotional wellness into their peer mentoring training? And perhaps even those colleges that have residential programs, their RA training. In other words, train the trainers, have students trained in some of these principles of mindfulness, positive psychology, and self-compassion, and they can deliver the goods to the students directly, rather than waiting and hoping that they will use counseling services, for example, many of which are already overwhelmed. Again, I'm over answering your question, but the last point, in addition to proactive, intrusive, I would say engaging. I think everyone knows that we can't just be lecturing to people for 60 minutes in succession. We want to deliver this content, all content, in a way that holds students in attention and gets them to actively process the material we present to them. I am excited if students are doing stuff online and using visual media, I would like to capitalize on that. If they're watching TED Talks, let's capitalize on that. They can read, just as I can read critically, they can view critically. So yes, allow them to capitalize on the visual medium, which this Generation Z or whatever letter we're up to seems to have a propensity for, but let's infuse those visual media with some real intentional, reflective, engaging, cognitive experiences. I'm a big fan of 1-minute papers. I think they can be incorporated very effectively into online visual program, and being very intentional. The thing about when you pre-record and you have something visual, you can intentionally insert certainly 1-minute papers at the end to reflect, get closure, apply what you just learned. But I've learned over the years, and again, I'm old and it's a lot of trial and error, that the 1-minute paper can be used not only at the end, but at the beginning to activate what they think, what they know, or what they think they know, or what they feel about the content. It could be inserted in during the presentation. You've heard of the 7-8 minute attention span. Some would say it's 5-6, pausing at critical times where students may need to reflect, particularly on critical information. I like those short writes, quick writes. And I also like it from an inclusiveness perspective. Everybody participates. All. It's not raising your hand and letting the most assertive students get involved. When you ask students to write and reflect and perhaps share their reflection when the pairs share, every student does it. It's inclusive pedagogy as I see it. And I'm not saying we should use online in lieu of in-person. I'm an in-person guy. I mean, this next FOE conference is online and I am out of sorts because I'm not there with people. I see it not in lieu of, but in conjunction with in-person. In fact, I think they work synergistically. If we can get them the information online, we don't have to tell it to them in person. That leaves more in-person time for interpersonal interaction and practical application. We're doing that already with orientation, loading a lot more online so we could spend more time with our students connecting with each other, connecting with them. I see it with advising too, a trend to get as much information online, opening up those advising sessions for bona fide human interaction.
So when I was teaching as an adjunct professor, I was teaching, one of the courses I taught was hybrid. And that's what I had my students do. Sometimes I would give them TED Talks to watch or reading, and I'd have them do that in advance of coming to class. And then when we met in class, we had such more meaningful discussions. We had fruitful discussions. They were more engaged. I was able to split them up into small groups so they could interact with one another. And they found it to be more exciting and a deeper way to facilitate the knowledge that they already gained watching videos or reading the content that they read.
When you describe that, Sarah, reminds me of again, this was happening pre-COVID, flip the classroom, flip it so that, they do more in class actively as opposed to sit passively in class and do their activity outside. Reverse it, do a 180. And that's exactly how the hybrid thing, if it works well, you can flip the class. And I would argue for those who are not FYE support program professionals, you can flip programs. Orientation, instead of talking at them, a bunch of talking heads, deliver that online, hold them accountable to reflections, and then open up orientation for really powerful interpersonal connectivity.
I think it can be so much more engaging that way. Yeah. Thank you, Joe. All right, and so I'm just wondering, one more question for you, and then I'd love to see what some of our colleagues that are among us have asked. But I'm wondering if you view these changes being made to the content and delivery of first-year experience programming in response to COVID-19 be something that will end after the pandemic is over? Or do you see these as more enduring practices? Do you see them carrying on?
Good question. Maybe I'm being an internal optimist. I see a silver lining in this. I'm amazed and impressed about how all the time and effort people are putting in to adapt and deliver programming under this crisis, under duress. I'd love to see these not be stopgap, short fix, plug the dam or dike measures that, okay, we did all that, now we go back and after the other way. I'd love to see it as some of this stuff is long-term investments, that all the effort now can result in better learning experiences for future cohorts of college students. I think it's similar to what I was saying before, all the stuff that we're now converting online because we couldn't deliver in person, let's continue to do that. That's good pedagogy. I can see all that work continuing beyond COVID to allow more active, engaged time in person. And so we can do all that conversion. I think will have a long-term benefit, and I'd love to see it persist. The mental health content, I know there are more FYE professionals. Well, students are isolated, they're under stress with COVID. Let's try to deal with that with programming and information to help them cope with this current crisis. I love to see that extend beyond. The research, and it's in the packet, that I was seeing, and I was surprised to see that during COVID, help seeking, whether it be online or in person for emotional issues, is either flat or declining. So there are people, we know stress is up during COVID, yet people getting help for stress hasn't been going up. So there's probably going to be an after effect here we have to deal with, and continuing some of that emotional support that we built into COVID will help address that. The other thing I came across is a phenomenon in psychology called the negativity dominance. Even after a crisis like COVID lifts, there's a lingering, I don't know what you call it, emotional aftershock or ripple effect. It's not going to go away immediately. So all those supports, emotional supports and social supports that we've tried to build into the COVID crisis, I see that having long-term benefits beyond the end of COVID. I'd love to see it continue. My last point, because I kind of hinted at it indirectly as I've been rambling around, I see a lot of stuff done under COVID being very relevant for diversity, equity, and inclusion beyond COVID. Let me see if I can. The idea of intrusive delivery, getting the information to students, something I mentioned before, that's going to help underrepresented students get access to emotional support that otherwise we were waiting for them to seek out on their own. So that intrusive infusion into required programs, I think that should continue to reduce that equity gap. The engaging delivery, trying to build in more activities to online, getting students more actively involved. I see that as inclusive pedagogy. I'd love to see that continue under the idea of equity beyond COVID. And the content of those programs, mindfulness, positive psychology, self-compassion. And this is summarized in the research. I'm surprised how the implications for diversity that I was coming across. Mindfulness not only increases awareness, it increases awareness of implicit bias and unconscious bias, which is a powerful concern right now in DEI. It also increases empathy, you know this better than I do, and openness to new perspectives and diverse viewpoints. So mindfulness as a tool for promoting equity strikes me as promising. Self-compassion, not only do people learn to be more compassionate about their own suffering, in the process, they become more compassionate about other suffering. That has implications for equity and empathy for those who may have been suffering from bias and discrimination. And positive psychology, just to take one, the strengths idea. We've always talked about strengths, but strengths can be culturally variable. What we've been called weaknesses or deficits in some cultures, if we recognize that people who've had to cope with adversity and discrimination and bias or oppression may be developing unique strengths as a result of that. And if we can increase those students' awareness that the suffering that they've had may have equipped them with some very resilient college success skills that they hadn't been aware of. So I like the implications of positive psychology also for the DEI movement. Now, I'll just stop here. Here's my last point. I promise that we can get to the questions. There are two issues that I think are right hot on our FYE plate. Now, this is just my view. I'm no expert. Certainly mental health, emotional wellness, as you had asked before, that existed before COVID. That and has now been really intensified by COVID. So we want to go after that directly with and strongly with emotional wellness program. The other thing, perhaps since the George Floyd incident and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, equity is on our plate right now. And this is a challenge, yes, but also a window of opportunity. If these are hot issues, mental health and DEI, then let's strike while the iron is hot. Let's capitalize on the energy that exists around these issues to move forward and advance these programs that we know are going to benefit students. I've always felt this about the first year experience movement. Yes, we are advocates for students change, for students, but also we not only advocate, we have to agitate a bit for programs that we know are important for student success, to promote programs that are to meet emerging students' needs and to preserve programs that serve those needs. I don't want to end on a negative note, but I am concerned about cost cutting now because of COVID. Some schools, particularly two-year colleges, have lost revenue, and I know what the movement is. Let's cut the fat. What's the fat? And sometimes those are those support programs, like academic and counseling programs. Yeah, they may be cutting the fat, but they'll be cutting their nose to spite their face. I think that's a bad move. I'd love to see our first year experience people be fully equipped to argue that if you start cutting these programs in an attempt to cut costs, we're also going to cut college completion rates and reduce the likelihood that students will reach their full potential. Sorry to be wordy on that.
Not at all, Joe. I appreciate all of your insights. You had so many valuable insights that you just shared. And if it's okay, I'd love to move into some questions from the group we have here. Let's see. All right. So here's a question. Can you talk a little bit more about how to incorporate the emotional support into courses? I'm assuming that you're suggesting more than just having a presentation made by a counseling center or bringing students to a wellness center.
Yes. Well, and this may sound like a plug for your program, but one thing that appealed to me about your program is that you've got experts on these fields, actively involved in research and practice, delivering video presentations, TED Talk-like video presentations that students can watch outside of class. And then there are facilitators manuals to accompany that. So here's that hybrid or flip thing. So I see the visual approach, the video approach being very effective if it's, as we've discussed, if it's infused with active reflective thinking. So that's just entertainment. Let's kick back and watch the TED Talk. But they do something and then bring that to class where they actually discuss it and practice it. I'm hopeful that that modular approach would be a way to do that, where the experts provide the information in the context of active student engagement and reflection on that information. And then we, who may not be experts in these fields, are then equipped to facilitate that with discussion and exercises in person.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. All right, here's another question. With the events of the last year in terms of racial and social inequities, along with political division, do you have suggestions about how to address these societal issues in first year experience?
Well, it's a project that I'm working on right now. I see it fitting under two traditional topics covered by the first year experience: diversity. Now, my approach historically has been diversity. Let's capitalize on the diversity on campus. Let's access these different points of view. It increases critical thinking, creative thinking. I mean, that's all been a very positive thing. But I'm wondering now if it's time to also maybe, I guess the word is anti-racist. You can be non-racist and welcoming of new ideas, but might it be time under our traditional heading of diversity to pick up inequity, systemic sorts of racism that may exist on campus in our society? I know we can't do everything in the first year experience course, but I think it's a natural extension of our diversity piece. Also, I see it as perhaps a natural extension of critical thinking. That let's consider all the factors that contribute to these inequity gaps that we're seeing here. Is it all personal responsibility or lack thereof, or are there other environmental factors that combine in ways to create the inequities we see? To me, that's a cognitively challenging, critical thinking, comprehensive thinking issue. And we can address that under that topic, either in lieu of or in addition to addressing it under diversity.
Thank you, Joe. All right, moving along here, let's see. invisible barriers to success like imposter syndrome were mentioned. Do you believe it to be helpful to name these with students through first year experience course topics to put language to their experience? Or does that often shut students down?
That's a good question. You know, it reminds me of I think it's George Steele. I know his last name. He's at Berkeley. He's this idea of stereotype threat. If you start treating people, suggesting that they need special treatment or they have special issues, it kind of plants the doubt, you know, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Um, I don't, again, I'm speaking not as an expert, as someone who's fumbled with these subjects. I believe it's important to unearth them, but perhaps maybe this is like the mindfulness, this dispassionate, step back from them. Don't immerse yourself in, step back from them rather than over-identify with them. I think we need to talk about the language. Some of this language is being misinterpreted by people who don't seem to see the value of the DEI initiative, you know, like defund the police. I mean, it's not that we want to eliminate the police. We want to reallocate or redistribute police funds in ways that serve the communities better. And there's other language that we use, like affirmative action is interpreted as reverse discrimination. We've got to get at the language. Language matters. And how we present white privilege sometimes puts people some whites right on their heels. Again, immediately defensive, and to use the language that our questioner asked, I'm sorry, I don't know his or her name, shuts the conversation down. So I don't think we can dodge the language. We have to raise it, distance ourselves from it, and look at it in an objective and critical way. Easier said than done, I admit. But off the top of my head, that would be my best response. It's a good question.
Thank you, Joe. All right, I think we should take one more. Maybe we'll move into the 1 minute paper and then we'll come back to some.
Sure, whatever you like.
So here is a question. What challenges in the classroom do you think we will face when things do return to normal?
Oh, that's an optimistic question. I would say that same challenges that we faced prior to COVID. I'd say, I don't mean to be redundant, but we're still going to have mental health issues. We're going to still have issues about making our courses engaging and inclusive in terms of pedagogy that benefits everyone. And all the first year experience issues, again, how do we continue to get support for our programs that we know are so critical for students' needs, lobbying, having research available to support our classroom-based strategies. There are some faculty who still resist this stuff, activities, fun activities, that the only meaningful class is actually dissemination, professing factual information. I see the same challenges regarding proactive, engaging, intrusive delivery of support services and dealing with the issues of mental health and equity as recurrent challenges beyond COVID.
Thank you, Joe. All right, so I think we should move into the 1 minute paper and then we'll circle back to some of these questions. All right, Joe, if you'd like to lead us through this exercise. And again, this is something that you can take back and use with your students either in the classroom or online.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, the 1 minute paper can occur anywhere. It was developed, faculty like to hear this, by a physicist at Berkeley, actually, who did it anonymously to get feedback about whether his class, you know, there was stuff that students didn't understand. And I've kind of tweaked it to make it more of a learner-centered thing. And the one that I suggest, this is the end of class, but it could be done at the beginning, in the middle, a very adaptive tool. The good news, what ideas shared in the session did you find most useful and hope to put into practice? Want to know what resonated, what to accentuate if we ever did this again. And more importantly, were there questions that you had that you were hoping that would be, or challenges and obstacles that would be addressed in the session that were not answered, that would help a meet plan. So it's a win-win. What resonated? What was missed? And again, these questions could be adapted to any course or program you're involved with. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. So should we move along to some other questions, Joe?
Sure, it's up to you guys.
Okay, I think we should. I think that would be nice. I'm glad we got to share this tool as a way for uh, faculty and staff to take this back to their students. But we do have some fruitful questions coming through, and I think it'd be nice to keep the conversation moving along. And so let's see here. I'm finding that due to COVID and loss of connection, it has been difficult for discussions to occur, especially when you have students who are in seat and online at the same time. Do you have any suggestions?
Phew, that's kind of a technology one. I may have to appeal to help from the group. This is sometimes I do in class. Can anybody in class help me with that question? Perhaps type chats or type in a possible answer. Um,
Let's see what we have come through the chat.
help the teacher and empower the students. I wish I had a quick answer to that question. It's something I'd have to deliberate about. Maybe some folks have experienced that and have come up with a strategy that could be shared with our classmate.
And I see somebody else has had something similar in here as well, that many FYE instructors have been saying their classes are extremely quiet and people are reluctant to talk in class, especially with masks on and being socially distant.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Let's see. I found taping students who are joining online before class to be a leader helped tremendously. Somebody else suggested.
Oh, tapping or taping?
Sorry, tapping.
Oh, okay, just wanted to make sure. Yeah,
Um,
that's a good idea.
one of my colleagues has a student monitor and they monitor the chat from Zoom so that it can be integrated into classroom discussion. That's a fantastic idea. So you monitor the questions coming through, and then this way everybody feels engaged. Somebody else suggested you can incorporate the 1 minute paper as a 1 minute breakout instead to get things rolling. So what a good idea. Offering up those questions and then splitting people up into groups. Let's see, I use slides and or other visual platforms to help engage students both in person and online. Fantastic. Thank you.
There's a teaching strategy called a shared lecture. If it's a topic that students know something about, before we engage in our presentation, let's first solicit students' ideas, and whatever is missing, then we could add to. But if it's something that students, I always say to the class, there's more collective wisdom in this class than in my head. Let's tap it. And we could always augment the students' ideas, or in some cases correct them if they're ideas, but give the class the opportunity to suggest solutions and ideas.
Thank you, Joe. All right, I have another question here. Do you think we will have trouble getting students back in the classroom? We are seeing a lot of students choosing online and remote options.
There are some schools, and I don't know if this answers the question, that the beauty of online, and for those who do exclusively online, you may be familiar with the research on this. If they complete, they learn as much or more than students doing it in person. Problem is a lot of attrition. And because of the lack of social connectivity, there's a lot of attrition with online. And for inexperienced students, like first-year students, they may lack the time management and independent skills to work, autonomously. So I would think it would have to depend on the stage of development of the students. Some schools, and I really like this strategy, they will allow their students to take online courses if they have demonstrated excellence, or at least a modicum of academic success in in-person performances. So that's a tough call. I would hate to prohibit all opportunities for online learning, but I would think we might have to be selective about the stage of development of the student and their history of academic success. Probably a blending would be best, but with a little selectivity about what students would be allowed unlimited access to online courses.
Thank you, Joe. All right, another question we have. What suggestions do you have to give to parents to help them and their children have the emotional preparedness?
Well, so this is a question about family. I really always like the idea of a family newsletter and some kind of regular family forum. Um, then in the retention literature, there's the phrase, you don't only retain the students, you retain the family. So very intentional use of our opportunities with parents to mention emotional wellness programming, encouraging students to take advantage of emotional support services without feeling that they are admitting to a problem. That it could be a matter of not just making a good thing better rather than admission of a mental illness. So parental support and seeking emotional support services, particularly among cultural groups that historically have not been willing to do that, and to capitalize on new family orientation, any family newsletters, electronic or paper. Some schools have family weekends. These would be venues now where we might intentionally infuse some information to parents about how they can support their students' emotional wellness as well as their academic and career needs and all of that.
Thank you, Joe. So we're coming to a close on our time now, and I'd like to just put up both of our email addresses in case we don't have an opportunity to get to all of your questions. And I am going to take your questions down, and we will be reaching out to answer any questions that we might have missed or not been able to get to this afternoon. And I would just like to take the opportunity to thank all of you for joining us in this very important and meaningful discussion. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Joe for being here and answering all of our questions and just providing such valuable and wonderful insights. And also a special thank you to our ASL interpreter, Erica. We appreciate you being here with us today as well. And so, Joe, I'd like to just turn it back over to you if you have any concluding remarks, anything you'd like to share with the group before we say our farewells.
Well, the trouble with online is I never got to see the faces. I've seen the names come in, and I like to say those who wrote in comments who I know and have met in the past. I saw Rachel being the last one from Mississippi. I remember you, and I'm sorry I didn't get to see you and interact with you. And I really would love to, hi, Ben. I really would love to I will intentionally review your questions, your 1-minute papers, and if you feel comfortable, if it's something that we didn't address, I'd be happy. I can't promise immediate turnaround, but eventually I'd like to write back to you and try to address them the best I can.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all again. I wish you a wonderful rest of your week and just really appreciated you being here. We'll be sending out an email so that you can have the article that Joe referenced throughout this talk. It has some of the research on the 3 fields that we talked about and some additional information. So wishing you well, and thank you so much again.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.